So this one's going to be just a little bit different than some of my other videos because I wanted to take time to talk about the man they call Sting. Sting having his retirement match tonight as I record this, so I do not have the results of that or anything like that, but it kind of occurred to me thinking about it today, knowing that, Sting's having his last match tonight. By the time you watch this, he probably will have already had his last match. That Sting was a really special character, not just to the wrestling business, but to me specifically. He was single-handedly the guy that got me into WCW as a kid. It certainly wasn't going to be Barry Windham or fucking even Ric Flair, as fun as he was to listen to him talk and stuff. As a kid, there was nothing there. It's somebody you'd appreciate as you got older and you understood some of the Space Mountain stuff that he was talking about, that kind of thing. But otherwise, looking at like big, burly NWA type guys, Arn Anderson or whatever, it was just never, I didn't care. It wasn't a Magnum PA. None of that appealed to me, but Stinger did. Sting stood out like a sore thumb with the neon colors and the face paint. I had a cousin very early, young, when I was a kid, that came over with his action figure collection. We'd play with toys and stuff like that. And I was always a big action figure guy. Wrestlers, Ninja Turtles, Batman. That was my jam. And he came over and he had a few of the really hard, are they Galoob? Is that who did them now? The really rock hard, like stiff rubber guys. Not the bigger rubber guys, but before that they had these smaller and they were rock hard and they were posed. And Sting was like this. You couldn't do anything with them. It wasn't like the Hasbros at the time were the contemporary competitors for the WWE side, which had action moves and their arms would spin and stuff like that. These guys were stationary, but Sting caught my eye right off the bat. The toy, and then watching him on TV, the colors, the bright greens, the pinks, the oranges, the blonde hair, the face paint. I was a huge Ultimate Warrior fan as a kid. Something about the face paint when you're a kid, just maybe it's the colors, maybe it's the explosion of energy. But I was a big Ultimate Warrior mark, and Sting caught my attention because of that. Which is ironic because at that time I had no idea that they were it was before internet, before, biography videos and, those documentaries and stuff like that. I didn't know that Warrior and Sting, I made the correlation that they look similar-ish, but I didn't know that they were actually tag team partners. And had a little, started together as a tag team before splitting off and going their separate ways. Sting caught my attention right away, and I watched. He got me watching in those early, God, it was probably the early WCW. I don't remember for exact, but my fandom may have gone back to the late days of Jim Crockett even. But because I very specifically remember Four Horsemen, and I remember, Barry Windham, and I remember the Stinger, and I remember Lex Luger. But it was right on that cusp. If it wasn't early WCW, it was certainly very late Jim Crockett, because then Sting kind of carried over into that early 1990s era of WCW where, he was working with like RoboCop, but then he had the run with Lex Luger. I very specifically remember the tag team match Stinger would have had with Sting and Luger versus the Steiner brothers. That was a huge one for me as a kid. I thought also because they were all baby faces, it just blew my mind. It was just such a wild match. And then when Luger turned heel and he was with the Harley Race there and he was the champion. I remember Stinger's run with. I remember him working with Vader. I remember him working with Cactus Jack. I remember him working with Rick Rude. That's another one of my favorite wrestling memories from that early WCW era, was the match where he had with Rick Rude where Sting's knee was taken out. I think it was Might have been, was it Cactus Jack that did it earlier in the show? I don't remember. Because it had to do with a box. But Sting's knee was hurt and he had to go to the hospital. And so Rick Rude came out and he had Paul Heyman with him. And they were, they were doing the whole thing like the referee's going to count to 10. And if Sting can't show up, then he's got to forfeit the title. And Sting made the heroic, like the ambulance pulls up in the back. Like as a kid, oh man, that was huge. That was such a fun angle. And he came running through the back and he came out and his knee was wrapped. And you're like, no, his knee is weak. And then I believe he lost. Didn't he lose to Rick Rude that night as well? Which gave more credibility to, because his knee was hurt. As a kid, I could buy that shit. Like when Bret Hart lost to the Mountie. It's like the Mountie, but then they're like, oh yeah, but he had a fever or a temperature. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, it makes sense then. He's not at 100%. He's being taken advantage of by this weaker guy. And Sting, like the run with Vader and Cactus Jack. I think he is in the mix with Abdullah a little bit in that era. It was a really fun. He was feuding with Lex Luger, his old best friend. And that's why when Ric Flair made the jump to WWF, I popped for that because I actually knew who Ric Flair was from watching WCW, and of course, some of the older fans would be like, yeah, duh, of course. But like as a kid, I think Ric Flair to WWF was the first big jump that I recognized with my own eyes, and then even. When Lex Luger came over a little bit later, but El Gigante when he came over as the Giant Gonzalez, Sid Vicious when he came over as Sid Justice, all of them. I was like, I know that guy from the early WCW because Stinger was my guy. I remember buying WCW comic books. They had a comic book down at the drugstore. They talk about, I used to buy a comic book at the drugstore for a dime. I don't think it was a dime, quarter, buck. I don't know. But I remember my mom buying me those along with some like X-Men comics and that kind of thing. But they had, Stinger was a comic book character. Like it was a WCW comic, but I bought it because Sting was on the cover and Sting was, being followed throughout he had a storyline in the comics. So that was fun. Right up until when I transitioned into my preteen and teen years, that was the Attitude Era. And suddenly, like, this colorful, face-painted, flamboyant, charismatic, he's got the Riz, right? Scorpion guy, even like Scorpions, because I'm Scorpio. I'm a November birthday, so Scorpio in the house. Like, all of it was just... I just loved me some Stinger. But as I grew into my preteens, that larger-than-life, colorful superhero character, now you're starting to... He changed with the times. He changed with the age as well. Because, whether he knew it or was conscious of it or not, or if he was just following the wrestling product, because the wrestling product was going the same way. Wrestling grew up with me as I grew up with wrestling. When I became, when I was a kid, it was cartoon characters. And then when granted, the NWA and Crockett and WCW wasn't necessarily known for the cartoon characters, but Sting was. Sting was a cartoon character. And then I got to the point where I was getting older. And now I was, I had a little bit of a rebellious attitude in myself, and everything was edgy. And, that's where you get the Sonic the Hedgehogs and the Jerry Springers and, like, everything started turning. South Park became a thing at that time, so everything started growing a little bit of an edge, and Sting changed right along with that. Instead of getting left behind in the 80s and the early 90s as the colorful neon billboard surfer guy, like that would not have lasted through the 90s. That character had to evolve. And it was subtle at first by not, dyeing his hair and kind of he was growing it out a little bit. But he was still wearing the neon and the face paint. But when he turned, man, when he became the fucking Scorpio, the Crow Sting. God damn it. When he became the Crow Sting, that was it. That was a game changer. You know, all of a sudden, he was the most interesting character on TV for me all over again. Him and the NWO were the reason I watched WCW. The NWO came in, that was fascinating, but what they were able to do with Sting, I'll still argue for me, for my money, I will argue that the NWO Sting storyline specifically was the greatest storyline in the history of my lifetime. Maybe, you know, people have the recency bias saying the Bloodline's the greatest storyline. Maybe Austin McMahon, certainly you could argue that all day long. I wouldn't, you might be able to convince me. But for my money, Sting and the NWO, man, the way that when they came in and he was the babyface and he was Team WCW always, and he was fighting that good fight. But they had their imposter Sting, and this guy who has been carrying a flag for WCW his entire run, who's been a babyface, a kid hero, suddenly like his friends and all his coworkers and the people that knew him best were like, "Oh, that was you, Lex Luger. I looked into your eyes. It was you, Sting. I saw you." Man, everybody turned their back on Sting. He did not turn his back on anybody. They turned their backs on him. Everybody, the whole company did. And even when he walked away from them, he said, "Fine, fuck all of you. I'm done. This is your problem now. I'm going to go fucking sit up in the rafters and brood about it." And he did. He watched, and he watched WCW die and get laid out for weeks and weeks and months and months and months. Heat. But then, when Sting did come back, which also, by the way, what a gig. You're getting paid the same. You're sitting up in the rafters. He wasn't even injured or anything. Saved years on his career. You wonder why? I mean, I bet you just that time off right there was a huge help for him. And he was able to come down, and he still defended WCW. He came in. Remember, he did that the War Games, just to prove, like, that is the fake Sting. I'm the real Sting. I told you so. Now fuck off. And then he sat in the rafters for a while. And when he finally came back as the Crow Sting, it was to help WCW still. He didn't turn on them. They turned on him. But now he's a loner. Now he's the phantom that haunts. He's the conscience of WCW. He's Undertaker-esque, not that he's the dead man, but he's mystical. And not even mystical. He's got a mystique around him, though. He's mysterious, and he only appears when he wants to, and he's a loner. But he's our loner. He's fighting the good fight, whatever his cause, whatever his purpose. He doesn't speak anymore. Sting was so loud, so flamboyant. He was a talker. He was a hell of a talker. I wouldn't put him in the list of best promos of all time, but he certainly could he could get across the energy. You know what I mean? He could sell a fight easy. So now he's not talking to anybody. It was just so brilliant. And on the other channel, you had Austin McMahon, and that's why wrestling was the greatest time ever. And it all built up to Sting finally being the guy to beat Hollywood Hulk Hogan and take his world title. Now, they botched that finish up. There's politics there. It doesn't work for me, brother. Sting didn't tan that day. We've all heard all those stories of why it didn't work out. And, it is, when you hear that it's all about the chase for the babyface and not the run, think about that, because nobody really remembers Sting's title reign there. And it was short, too. That's probably part of it. And he was going through some shit at the time, admittedly. But that build up to him dethroning Hogan, amazing. That's all you needed, was that moment of Sting. If you would have got a clean 3, the crowd would have probably reacted better. It would have been a whole better thing. It's one of the many fails of WCW. But that storyline, they did everything right up until then. And I blame that on Hogan and Bischoff. They've fucked up the ending towards the end, and they should know better. They should have known better then, and historically they should have known how big of a story that was. Hulk's got many of those in his career, the Warrior and all that, but And then Sting carried the flag for WCW well into the point where WCW was dying, past its prime, and he probably should have made his jump to WWE, but he always stayed away from it. And then when the invasion happened and WCW guys were picked up, Sting famously said he turned on the TV to watch how it would go, and The Rock said, "It doesn't matter what your name is to Booker T." Punked him right out on TV. And Sting goes, "Okay, that's it. I'm not going there because of all the hard work I did here. I'm going to go over there and they're going to go, 'Who are you?' Doesn't matter who you are. Fuck off." Like, you can't do that to Sting. And I don't think they would have, but I get where he was coming from, at least at that time. But for him to never go, he signed with TNA instead, and that was only supposed to be a couple gigs, but they kept paying him good money, and it was easy. And Sting's one of those guys where he's not a mark. It's not about, I need that big run in WCW, or in WWE. I need the WrestleMania main event or win the WWE. He doesn't need any of that. What are you paying me? Is it pay good? What's the hours? How long do I got to be there? I mean, that's it. That's really all it came down to. And that's not in a bad way, because I think he's one of those guys that is in it for the money and in it for the business, not for the love of it, but has given more to the business as that kind of guy, as a non-fan, than most have. His jumping off of ladders and through tables and shit when he's 60-some years old. Like, this guy certainly, like, even though, like, wrestling is a business, it's a job to him, and it always has been. It's a job that he gives his all for and that he has passion for. TNA, he single-handedly kept TNA afloat. I don't care what anybody says. TNA had great talent, AJ, Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle, all of that shit. But Sting was really like their anchor, wasn't he? He stayed there through the whole thing. He got to experiment a little bit. Main Event Mafia, the Joker Sting. He got to test out a couple different characters. The Main Event Mafia character, though not as over as anything else, being more Steve Borden-esque. You're coming out in suits, no face paint, sunglasses. Like, now you're rich Steve Borden, and it was, like I said, it's not his best work, and it's not like the thing that's going to launch him to superstardom, but it's fun to see that other side, that he's able to do that character too. He can come out and be a suit and tie businessman that just talks shit and is, backs it up or doesn't back it up or whatever the case may be. Then the Joker Sting, to go even wilder. Now I'm the Crow Sting, but I'm off my rocker. I'm losing it a little bit. And yes, it was kind of a ripoff of the Joker. Obviously, that's why it's called the Joker Sting. When Heath Ledger did the Joker at that era in 2008, when that movie came out, The Dark Knight, it was huge. And Sting was smart to capitalize on that, and he was able to. Just, a little bit more of the Joker in his personality, and he was able to show yet another side. Look how this guy has evolved already. The surfer color bro Sting that the kiddies loved, up to the brooding dark Crow Sting, to the elite businessman Sting, to the I'm crazy and don't know what I'm going to say or do next Sting. Then he finally, we're jumping ahead a little bit, gets his opportunity to go to the WWE. Finally, they're like, "Bro, just please come here. We will treat you like the legend that you are." And then, of course, they beat him at WrestleMania, because why not? LOL, Triple H wins. Jesus. Sting. Rollins had what? He had a title match with Rollins too. Sting had all of what? 2 matches in WWE? 3. He had one with Triple H and he had one with Rollins. He had to have won one other to get a title shot with Rollins, didn't he? Or how did he end up getting the title shot? In any event, he had a main event world title shot against Seth Rollins. So that's definitely like, look, if you're only going to do a couple things in the WWE, having a huge high-profile match with Triple H at WrestleMania, and, it was kind of silly what they tied it in with the DX and the NWO, and the WWE guys obviously get the win in the end, right? Get over on... at that time, I guess there were rumors, I recently just read actually, that Rock was, they were kind of building up for The Rock to possibly come back around, maybe the next year or something, where he would have faced Triple H. And that's kind of where you got that Ronda Rousey, Stephanie, Triple H Rock thing. And they were kind of hoping to do a Triple H Rock match sometime in there. And so the thinking was you want to keep Triple H strong for something like that. But it did end up hurting Sting. It would have been nice in hindsight, because they never did anything else with Triple H really, to have given Sting one fucking giant win at WrestleMania to help celebrate his career, right? But he got a title match with Rollins too. He did that thing where he was under the statue. He had a little his debut at Survivor Series. He had a little fun, but it was a cup of coffee in WWE. It was not significant. Nothing happened there. But he was there enough to, probably get an action figure or two and make a little bit of history. He's on WrestleMania. When you look through the evolution of WrestleMania and you look back through the history of the cards, somewhere buried in there next to the play button, you'll see Sting wrestled Triple H at WrestleMania. So good for him. And now AEW, people kind of scoffed at him coming back to AEW when he was brought in, and he's an old man, and what are you gonna do? He's gonna hurt himself because he got injured in WWE. Really, he had that really sad ending. Kind of didn't even touch on that. He took that rough bump in the corner from Rollins, and that was it. It jarred his spine, shook something up in there, and he was Dunsky. That was the end of Sting right there. But somehow, some way, he got cleared to come back. That always seems to be a thing in AEW, doesn't it? Miraculously, people are allowed to get cleared and work in AEW, but not WWE. Though I do think there was a pinch of Vince not wanting some guys to get cleared and would rather them just stay retired, like a Daniel Bryan, for example. But Sting was able to have a whole second significant, not second, whole fifth run in AEW. Made a new companion in Darby, both in real life. By all accounts, Darby and Sting are close, for real close. And Darby had a lot to do with a lot of Sting's big match, getting Sting back in the ring to begin with, and getting him to try certain things that maybe he wasn't willing to try in the past. Remember, they dipped Sting's toe in with a theatrical back in the COVID era. They're like, well, Sting, you can do a theatrical match. We could do that. But then Sting kind of got the bug, right? And he's like, well, now I want to try a real match. And we were all kind of cringing and holding our breath as Sting did it. But Sting got through it all. And then Sting became the guy that started taking weird, sick bumps and stuff and getting right back up from them, no-selling them completely, and just, It was great. It was fucking great. Sting's a legend. He has had one of the most legendary pro wrestling careers of all time. The longevity, the touching every single promotion and bringing something, helping every single promotion. Now, he didn't do a lot for WWE while he was there, but think about it. WCW was nothing without Sting. TNA would have been nothing without Sting. AEW would have been fine without Sting, but Sting added that. He was that one veteran that was at every show and just kind of he was a draw. I remember when I went to see CM Punk's debut in Chicago at the United Center. I remember Darby called out the best in the world, and the best in the world showed up, and then they panned up in the rafters, and it was Sting and Darby Allin up there. And I remember being so stoked. Punk was the selling point for that show, but the other one was I want to see Sting. And sadly, I got to see Sting on the show. Technically, he was in the building, and he was on the show as they panned up to the rafters. But from my angle, I had that big thing that sits over the top of the ring with the big screens on it and shit. I had to watch that. I had to watch them on that screen because it was blocking where they actually were up in the rafters, so I couldn't physically see it. Then I got the fuck out of there to beat the traffic because Chicago's traffic is horrible. horrible if you're not from around there and you're not used to it. Yikes. I mean, I live in a city, and I mean, Chicago's got 2 or 3 times the lanes on their freeways than I do. And everybody knows where they're going, which means if you don't, you're just you're lost in the shuffle, bro. So I wanted to beat the traffic. I got the fuck out of there. Apparently Sting came out and did an in-ring talking segment and stuff. So thank the crowd. You know, they do that thing at the end of the night where Tony comes out with a couple wrestlers and stuff. I missed that. Ooh. But God, man, Sting's one of those guys. And I don't, like I said, this is a little bit off the beaten path, and I'll wrap it up here. It's not my type of coverage on this show, but at the same time, Sting's retiring, and Sting was one of the few guys that I can look back and say he was an all-time favorite of mine. Like, I have a lot of favorites, a lot of people I really like and respect, but Sting was a guy that was there from absolute day one, childhood wrestling fandom. I don't really remember a time before Sting. You know, like I said, I did describe discovering Sting, but like those are my earliest memories of him, but they're so far back I don't remember a wrestling before Sting, other than WWF perhaps. You know, I hadn't made it to NWA yet because I hadn't found Sting yet. And he was that guy in that NWO storyline, and even AEW now, the fun, crazy shit, the run with Darby. Just all the respect in the world for the Stinger man. And I wanted to share my appreciation for him and his career with you guys. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below if you have similar. Love to hear your, similar stories or what you think of Sting. And again, you'll probably be watching this after his match. I assume he'll probably lose because obviously he's the champion. Of course, they could forfeit the belts the next night on Raw or have a tournament. Not Raw, Dynamite. Have a tournament or something, but I suspect Sting will go out on his back. But, man, what a guy. What a career. And it will be weird having a wrestling industry without him.
Oh yeah, thanks for checking out the video. Yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like it if you liked it. Yeah, and you can check out full episodes each and every Sunday right here on the channel. Oh yeah, dig it.